HSK is the most widely used proficiency test for Chinese, and many learners aim to master the vocabulary at each level. Yet some of the most important words are missing. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about the HSK, or 汉语水平考试, which is the most widely used proficiency test for non-native speakers of Mandarin. It's so widely used that the levels of HSK are used to grade listening and reading content, and there are also many textbooks and courses focusing on a certain level of the HSK. The part of HSK that people refer to the most, though, is probably the vocabulary lists. These make the task of learning Chinese seem more manageable. You simply have to work your way through the lists and you will be prepared for the next level. That's not really how language learning works, but that doesn't stop many students from caring a lot about the HSK vocabulary lists. And knowing lots of words is important when learning Chinese. However, if we scrutinize the HSK lists and also compare them to, say, frequency lists, we can see that there are in fact lots of words that are extremely common and useful for students, but which are left out of the HSK entirely. So in this episode, we're going to explore these words that you probably should learn even though they are not on HSK. Before we get to that though, I'd like to mention that I run monthly challenges at challenges.hackingchinese.com. These challenges are completely free to join. I provide information, some inspiration, and if you want, some friendly competition, and you then try to improve as much as you can in one specific area for the duration of the challenge. This month, the focus is on speaking ability, but if you listen to this in the future, you can just head over to challenges.hackingchinese.com to see what challenge is on when you are listening. For the duration of the speaking challenge, you'll also be able to sign up for a new tier of my pronunciation course. It includes the core content, so videos explaining all aspects of Chinese pronunciation, including initials, finals, tones, prosody, and so on. And I will give you personalized professional feedback on your pronunciation, or if you're a beginner, I will help you out as you work your way through the course. This new premium tier also includes private lessons where I will help you overcome challenges or learn the things you find tricky. This option will only be available this month, and it's also limited to the first 3 people who sign up, so if you're interested, please check it out. For more about the pronunciation course, you can go to pronunciation.hackingchinese.com. So let's return to the topic of this episode, which is vocabulary that's missing from HSK. So the goal here is to explore words that are important to know as a student, but that you would not learn if you limited yourself to the HSK lists. It's not obvious how to identify these words, and there are a couple of reasons for this. First, you need something to compare with to be able to say that something really is more important than some other words that are on the HSK. Second, you also need to know what a word is, otherwise you might be identifying things that really aren't on HSK, not because they are common or important, but simply because they aren't words. Let's explore these 2 issues first, and I should mention up front here that if you just want the list of missing words that I've identified, you should head over to the written article on Hacking Chinese, and there's a link in the show notes. I'm not going to read through the whole list, that will make little sense, but I am going to talk about how I created the list, what types of words are on it, and why you should learn them. So this is more a discussion about the list, but for the list itself, head over to hackingchinese.com. So the first issue is that when we identify a word that's more common or more useful than a word on HSK, we need to compare with something, and that's usually a frequency list. Now, if you look at the HSK vocabulary lists, it should be clear that at least on lower levels, it is not a frequency list. There are many keywords for students that simply aren't that high frequency in the language itself. So for example, there are many words related to learning Chinese, such as 老师, teacher, 学校, school, and so on, and these clearly don't make the top 100 words in Chinese as a whole, but as a student they are extremely important, and so they are on the HSK. If we flip this over and look at a frequency list to see what's not in HSK, we can see that many of these words are from formal written Chinese, because that's the sources that are used for these frequency lists, and it makes little sense for a beginner to focus on these words before words like 老师 and 学校. For a more in-depth discussion about common words in Chinese, you can check out episode 100, the most common Chinese words, characters, and components for language learners and teachers. The point here, though, is that we can't just compare with a normal frequency list, because then we will get lots of words that are missing from HSK, but that you don't want to learn. There is a workaround, however, because we can look at a frequency list which is not based on written Chinese. Collecting language spoken naturally to the extent that would be needed to say what's common in spoken Chinese as a whole is very hard and time-consuming, so there aren't many such resources. But again here there is a shortcut, because there is a corpus built on movie subtitles. And of course, a movie dialogue is not exactly the same as natural speech, but at least the people who write these dialogues try to make them sound natural, and so they are at least spoken Chinese, not written Chinese, such as we can find in novels, newspapers, and so on. Another interesting aspect here is that we're not really interested in comparing the whole HSK list to a full frequency list, even if it's based on movie subtitles, because that would only be useful if you happen to be on HSK 6. What I would like to be able to say instead is which words are missing from HSK 1, which are missing from HSK 2, and so on. HSK 1 contains 150 words, so we could just look at the top 150 words in the movie subtitle database and see which of these are missing from HSK. I don't think this is a good idea though, because there is always some selection about which words to learn, even though they are on the same level, so we can't really say that these words are missing, they are just not taught yet. What we would like to know is if there are words you have really missed or things you should learn if you finished, say, HSK 1. I think a decent way of doing this is checking vocabulary that's twice as common as the vocabulary that you've already learned. So in practice, that would mean that if you've finished HSK 1 with 150 words, we don't look at the top 150 words and see which are missing, we only look at the 75 top words to see which are missing. Similarly, when you've learned 1,000 words, we're not interested in the top 1,000 of the frequency list, but only the top 500, because if these are missing, they probably are high-frequency words you should know. Before we talk about which types of words are actually missing on different levels of the HSK, I want to return to the second issue for a while, namely what is a word? My intention here is not to have an in-depth academic discussion about wordhood in Chinese. You can indeed find such online and elsewhere if you search for it, but we do need to talk about it because it matters when we decide which words are missing and which aren't actually words. In English, and indeed most other languages, we use spaces between words, so it's not that hard to know in a digital text which letters belong to the same word, as it were. In Chinese, though, we don't use spaces between words, so there's no automatic, easy way to say if a character belongs to a word in front of it, or to a word after it, or perhaps if it is its own word. I know this sounds a bit theoretical, but it has a direct impact on what we consider to be a missing word. And I'll show that with an example that works for beginners as well. So do you think that ni, you, is a word? Do you think that hao, good, is a word? I think most people intuitively think that these are words, and that's also what we find in Chinese. So if you look these up in a dictionary with words, you will find both ni and hao. So far so good, but what happens when we put them together, such as in ni hao, hello? Is that a word? I mean, hello in English is a word, so is ni hao a word? What about something like ni men, as in you plural? Or what about ni men hao? Is that also a word? What about lao shi hao, used to greet your teacher? Is that also a word then? What I'm trying to show here is that while I think it's obvious that lao shi hao cannot be a word, it's a phrase, it's not obvious where between ni and lao shi hao you should actually draw the line. When does it stop being a word and when is it a phrase instead? The standard answer in Chinese, again you can verify this by using a word dictionary, is that ni hao is not a word, and none of the others I listed are words either. These are phrases. The crux of the matter is that the HSK word lists are word lists, but the movie subtitle database, the frequency list based on that one, doesn't necessarily agree on what is a word. And if we look at that list, we will find many things that aren't words. So just comparing directly won't work because it will show you lots of things that are missing from HSK but which aren't words. This means that you can't just mechanically compare one list with the other and see which words are missing. You have to actually go through all the words manually and check if they are words, or indeed if it's something that students might want to learn, which is exactly what I've done. I'll share my decision process and principles a bit later, but just to show an example here, 这个, as in this, is very common in the subtitle database, but it is not a word, and so it's not on HSK, whereas j and g separately are on the HSK, and this would then be a good example of something that I've not included in the missing words list. First, it's not a word, and second, it's not something you actually need to learn, because if you have finished HSK 1, you definitely know that j and g can be combined to form jg. What I want to find are words that are genuinely missing, that you should learn, but you won't learn if you stick to the HSK lists. When I compared the lists, I found around 1,000 candidate words that could be missing words. But then, when I went through all of them and looked at them and applied the principles that I will explain a little bit later, I removed around 300, ending up with 650 words that really are missing words in HSK. So, which are these words then? Well, for the full list, check the written article on Hacking Chinese, but here I will summarize the categories and bring up a few examples. First, many single-character words are missing, and I included these only when they didn't violate the principles I just mentioned, and when they can actually be used on their own. I think most students will know what fan means, even if they've only learned the compound 吃饭. But I chose to include these because it's not obvious that you can use these words separately. If you're the kind of student who only learns characters inside of words, you should definitely look at this section, because these are commonly used as standalone words as well. Here are some more examples in this category. 火, to live, 山, mountain, 车, vehicle or car, 美, beautiful. Second, names of places and countries are missing, except for a few ones in China, such as Beijing. These are words you normally learn in your textbook, but they are not part of HSK. So even if you memorized all the vocabulary on all levels, you would still miss words like 美国, USA, 英国, England, or 日本, Japan. Third, regional variants are missing. And at first this sounds like a good thing, you do want to focus on the standard language first, but some of these regional variants are so common that you basically have to know them to be able to communicate with normal people. The regional variants that are missing are particularly common in the south, but you should learn these even if you live in Beijing, because it's extremely common, and of course Chinese people also move around. You will meet people from all over China. To give you an idea of which words are in this category, here are a few examples. 这里, here, 哪里, where, 讲话, to talk, 老公, husband, 礼拜一, Monday. Fourth, profanity is missing entirely. This is not too hard to understand, I mean why they are left out of HSK, but also why they are common in movie subtitles. Still, some of these words are pretty mild and very common, so not knowing them is a problem. Here are some examples: 傻瓜, fool, and 笨蛋, idiot. Fifth, foreign things are mostly missing. Things, places, and phenomena that aren't common in China are not included in the HSK. So for example, 棒球, baseball, or 女王, queen, are not included. In a similar vein, we also have vocabulary related to religion that is also missing. For example, words like 教堂, church, 上帝, God, and 圣诞节, Christmas, are missing. Sixth, particles from informal language are missing. Many are included, but many are not, such as yo, ye, o, and These are extremely common, and it's nice to know them. As mentioned, these are just general categories of words that I've identified with some examples, and if you want to check the full list for each level of HSK, i.e. which words are missing from that level, you can check out the written article on Hacking Chinese and check the show notes for a link. As promised earlier, I will now describe the principles that I use to decide if something should be included or not. First, words that are also parts of words that are in HSK are included on my list. For example, 但是, but, is in the HSK lists, but only 但 is not. I chose to count this word as missing because it is a word and it's not immediately obvious that you can use it even if you know 但是. A less obvious example is 唱歌, to sing, which is in HSK, but 唱and 歌 separately are not in HSK, and so I included them as missing words because these you really should know. Second, combinations of words that are in HSK and form phrases are not counted as missing. I already mentioned an example of this when I said that 这 and 个 are on HSK, but 这个 is not. So I have not included zhege, nage, and so on as words or missing words because they aren't words. Third, I haven't included words plus particles if both components are in HSK. For example, 你们, you plural, is a combination of a word and a particle, and it can be assumed that you know this even if it's actually not in HSK. Fourth, I have ignored verbs plus complements if the meaning is obvious from the parts. For example, 找到, to have found something, is ignored because it's assumed that you know what this means if you know what 找 means, which is on HSK, and how 到, the complement, works, which is also on HSK. Fifth, single character words that are in HSK only as part of longer words are not included if the meaning is obvious. For example, I assume that you know what 前, as in front of something, means if you already know what 前面 means, because the latter is in HSK, but the former is not. Sixth, I removed any reduplication, so for example, kan is not a word, it's basically kan, to see twice, and it's not a word on its own. Seventh, adverbs plus verbs are excluded if the meaning is obvious. For example, I have not included 只是, as in to only be something, because both 只 and 是 are in HSK, and when you combine them, the meaning is obvious. Eighth, I deleted all the negated words, so things like 不要 or 不能 are not words, and so I didn't include them. Ninth, I didn't include any phrases, so things like 怎么样 are not words, and therefore I didn't mark them as missing. 10th, I didn't include things that are just logical extensions of things that are in HSK. So for example, 以前, before, is in HSK, but 以后, after, is not. And so I didn't count this because, well, you can use logic and figure out that both of these are possible. Finally, all erization, that's 化音, so adding the r at the end of words, is excluded. For example, 一点 is excluded if 一点 is included. Remember, the goal here is to give you a list of words that you might want to learn if you have focused on the HSK lists. And so, for example, including EDR if EDN is on the list is not useful because you obviously know one if you know the other. So how should you go about using the word list? Well, I normally don't recommend students to rely too much on word lists to learn new words and characters in Chinese. I think it's better to listen more and read more and get your vocabulary from there. But this, I think, is an exception because we're really plugging holes in your vocabulary knowledge. We are not just expanding randomly here using a list. We are looking at things you really should know. And by learning these, you can improve your ability to communicate and to understand Chinese quite a lot. That's it for this episode. For the full list as CSV, plain text, HTML, or perhaps as Skritterdex, you can head over to the written article on Hacking Chinese. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.